and welcome to this week's episode of The Wire Wrap. I'm Jahnavi Sen, and with me today I have independent journalist and researcher Mekhala Saran and The Wire's editor Seema Chishti. Thank you both so much for joining me. In a horrific tragedy, an Air India flight, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, carrying 242 people and flying from Ahmedabad to London, crashed very soon after takeoff on Thursday. Air India has confirmed that only one passenger has survived the crash, though government authorities have been unwilling to give a death toll so far. The plane crashed into the mess of the hostel at BJ Medical College, and at least 5 students are also believed to have died. The city police chief said on Thursday that 204 bodies had been recovered, but until the time of recording, no further official death toll has been released. Union Home Minister Amit Shah, who has gone to Ahmedabad, has said that the death toll will be released only after DNA testing of the remains that have been found. One of the people who died in the crash is former Gujarat Chief Minister Vijay Rupani. Union Civil Aviation Minister K. Ram Mohan Naidu has said that the government will be carrying out a fair and thorough investigation. But one of the things Shah said after he went to Ahmedabad was that this is an accident, perhaps to clarify that there was no meddling involved of any sort, but also that nobody can stop an accident. This was a little confusing because no investigation has happened so far. It's too soon. The black boxes have only been found a couple of hours ago today. The Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau has started a probe, and teams from the US and the UK will also be coming to assist. The UK's probe team will have expert status since there were 53 British nationals on board. Seema, I know we don't know a lot at the moment, partly because it's very soon and partly because there does seem to be some reluctance on the part of the authorities to release information to the public. Could you talk a little bit about what we've seen so far and what we should expect?
I think first it's been horrific, and I think all of India was completely shocked. At this scale of aviation tragedies, civilian aircraft is something that we are mercifully now not used to expecting, etc. And it's happened after a long time. What happened in Kochi was some time back, so it's absolutely horrendous for this to have happened. And it seemed quite clear from the visuals that people just took, amateurs, and randomly put out that there would be no survivors. So there was a little sliver of optimism when there was one passenger sitting in 11A who jumped out, the British national Vishwas Ramesh, who survived, which was like good news. But other than that, I think this aircraft kind of falling in what seems to be very odd things. There's a lot of darkness about it. Only one black box has been discovered so far.
I think they've actually both been found.
I see. Okay, they found both black boxes. And the fact that it fell in a populated area, in a city of Ahmedabad, on a hostel during lunchtime. So I'm deeply concerned about, of course, 241 deaths, which the government has not yet officially confirmed as having taken place, and a lot of deaths on the ground, and of medical students, and a wife of a doctor in the hospital, etc. So I think initially, what you want really is, of course, clarity, which information brings, however dark it is, and a sense that everybody who's there is looking out for future airplanes. There's anxiety, who gives reassuring messages on infrastructure, on safety, on making sure that all ends are tied. In this case, we still don't know whether the fact of the aircraft being Boeing has something to do with it, because Boeing itself has been under all kinds of clouds. There is nothing to connect those clouds and this, but that has been part of the conversation. Boeing shares fell as they would naturally, even if Boeing had nothing to do with this crash. But everybody wants to know if everything was done correctly, if all maintenance was in place, if the entire protocol had been followed, etc. So as to ensure that it doesn't happen again. I'm not seeing top leaders going there, etc. They're expressing deep discomfort, and it's a very good thing that they've gone to the place and met with people. But one is not seeing kind of accountability really come out, or reassurance beyond saying that we look after everybody, we look after all the relatives and insurance and all of that. So I think that's really important, and that's a bit of a running theme which we've seen, whether it's in infrastructure-related tragedies, whether it is the 5 passengers who were killed in Bombay, who we've not heard about since. Nobody's really said that there is accountability and responsibility, which is what people who are in office, who are elected to do that, must do, and other institutions who are mandated to do that, who are salaried to do that, whose only one job it is to keep lives safe, are doing. So I'm still waiting. It's just one day on, but I'm still waiting to see the accountability principle play out. But of course there is time, and I'm sure that public pressure and being scared of losing goodwill would ensure that everybody who's been elected to high office and everybody whose job it was to do their job will fall on the right side of this.
I mean, I just want to add to that point of accountability. I completely agree. And I understand that it's very important to mourn the loss right now, but we need to look forward from this, because it seems over the last few years there have been far too many deaths happening in India. And I understand a lot of it is beyond control, or a lot of these are devastating tragedies. But you saw those. I mean, I've still not forgotten the pile up of bodies during COVID at the banks of Ganga, or the people who died recently after the IPL match, or the Kumbh stampede. So it just feels that sure, there's always a deep sense of loss, but there has to be something, there has to be a greater push for accountability to ensure that fewer people lose their lives in such tragic circumstances, because you cannot just say that this is an accident and accidents happen and just let it go, because accidents do happen, sure, but accidents can also be avoided in a lot of situations. So yeah, I feel like there has to be greater emphasis on the question of accountability.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the Kumbh stampede, and the reticence in releasing death tolls was something we saw then as well as, of course, during the COVID pandemic. And Seema, perhaps you would want to talk about this. Recently the BBC has done an investigation in which they have come up with a death toll that is higher than till date what the government has been.
And actually, what the government has put, what BBC is saying, is only a figure which the Chief Minister Adityanath mentioned in the House. It is still not the official death toll. We still don't know how many civilians died in the military conflict with Pakistan. We still don't have the number 26 coming from a proper official source which says this is the death toll of the numbers who were killed on 22nd of April in Pahalgam. So that's like a running theme. We also know that those who died in COVID, the death toll ostensibly released by the government at that time, because there was a global expectation, so I think they were forced to release that, is less than 10 times what WHO has estimated. So I think this whole business of not giving a death toll, not giving information and a number, is really also a way of actually not being accountable. Because the minute you say that 300 people have kind of died or perished in this airplane, it's not about the topmost elected leader being responsible for it, but he's accountable for it. And that difference has to be kind of made. A lot of people spoke of how train crashes led to a former Prime Minister who was also Rail Minister, Lal Bahadur Shastri, resigning, Madhav Sindhya putting in his papers. That's not because they were responsible for it directly, but they were accountable for it. So I think that seems to be lost in the way that maybe government wants to be seen as being elected for we don't know what, and being rising above the fray. So being above the fray of my misery and not wanting that misery quantified, because that really puts attention and it draws and it becomes a statistic, an important statistic, when it's being searched on Google, when people are looking at headlines. So I think it's a way to dodge that. So yes, I think this kind of absence of toll is something where we need to speak about it, because numbers matter. This again came out even during this military conflict, when it came to losses, when it came to the losses that India suffered. All wars, all conflict lead to losses, big deal. The CDS, and one must respect General Chauhan to have come up with accepting that we lost aircraft. But he said numbers don't matter. Of course they matter. If we haven't lost 50 aircraft, because that would matter a lot, right? So to be able to just say numbers don't matter seems that something is wrong in the accountability mechanism. And what's important about accountability is that you prevent it, and you put the fear of the god, or you put the fear of the public, if you like, in people who claim to represent them. And that's very important to make sure that the next accident doesn't happen, or the chances of that are reduced.
I want to move on to what I wanted to discuss next, and this is something that has been making headlines over the last few weeks, but perhaps not getting the attention it deserves. And this is how authorities in Assam have been picking up people, detaining them, and then literally forcing them across the border to Bangladesh. These are people who have been declared foreigners by the foreigners tribunals in the state, and many of them several years ago. But several families have said they have no information on where their relatives have been taken. Some have only recognized their relatives from videos released from Bangladesh. There was one group that were left in no man's land between India and Bangladesh for 2 days, then detained in Bangladesh, then brought back to India. And it seems like due process here is not being followed. It also seems like the Indian authorities are not working in tandem with the Bangladeshi authorities on these deportation processes. An Indian Express report said a couple of weeks ago that more than 2,000 people have been, what the Assam government is calling this pushback, have been pushed back to Bangladesh since May 7 when Operation Sindoor, the military action against Pakistan, took place. Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma has confirmed that all of this is happening and also said that having your name on the National Register of Citizens in Assam does not mean that you're not going to be sent to Bangladesh. He also said that the state won't be following a legal deportation process and put the number of those deported just in the last couple of weeks at more than 300. Now, on the 2nd of June, the Supreme Court refused to hear a plea questioning the legality of what's going on in Assam and said that the petitioners should approach the Guwahati High Court. A High Court lawyer has also written to the Human Rights Commission saying that people who had earlier been released after being declared foreigners and had not broken any conditions of their release have still been rearrested or detained and are being threatened with deportation. Mekhala, I know you've been following this closely, so could you talk a little bit about what's been happening in Assam? What are the legal questions that are coming up?
Right. So I just want to start with two things. One would be that this is not a legal sort of deportation the way we understand deportation legally. What is happening is very different from how deportations essentially pan out, because the deportation, in a very strictly legal sense, should involve the government or the Ministry of External Affairs reaching out to the country that we want to send these people allegedly back to, and asking them to verify whether they are the nationals of that nation. So, for instance, if I'm alleging, and I'm the government of India, and I'm alleging that you, for instance, are a Bangladeshi, and I want to push you back or send you back to Bangladesh, I want to deport you to Bangladesh, I will first have to get the Ministry of External Affairs to call your government and confirm that you are a Bangladeshi national. Unless I do that, I cannot legally deport you. For instance, I think a legal expert was talking about this. A senior advocate, he gave the example of how Americans are deporting Indians right now. But before they put them in the planes, they actually check whether we will take them back or not. So that is essentially how deportation pans out. The other thing is the idea, the word pushback is being thrown around very loosely, because even the authorities are saying it, and hence, as journalists, we are using the same terminology, all of us, including myself. But the term pushback doesn't apply here, because pushback would technically mean that you are trying to get out, sorry, you are trying to enter India illegally, and the guards at the border are catching you and pushing you back.
It would happen
It
at the
doesn't
moment of migration.
exactly. It doesn't really mean that you will be you have lived all your life in India. You have most probably been born in India, or at least you have married in India, lived in India, had children here, worked here, and then you are sort of being pushed into another country. That's not pushing back, that would be pushing into. So I think we should be clear that this is neither deportation in a very strict sense or in a very legal sense, nor is it pushback, technically speaking. So we're in this very bizarre sort of no man's land in a way. We're neither here nor there, and I think the state is still figuring out what they're actually doing, because you've seen how disorganized this is. They're being sent, they're being brought back. One court is saying something else, the authorities are saying something else, the Supreme Court is saying we will send. So right now it's all very chaotic, and I feel like nobody's really figured out what's going on. But at the same time, there are very real lives and very real people whose liberty and whose life and whose mortal safety is in peril. And so I think it flies on the face of all kinds of laws. I can get into it if you want to kind of.
No, please.
Okay. So, I mean, essentially, the first thing is you don't need to be a citizen of India to have the protection given by Article 21 of the Indian Constitution that allows you right to life and personal liberty. Uh, just the fact that you're on Indian soil means that your right to life and liberty is protected. So, the state cannot take this away from you except by procedure established by law. That's what Article 21 says. Here, I don't know what procedure established by law is being followed. It seems that there isn't. The Chief Minister of Assam has recently, like earlier he said that they will not get bothered with the law. Now he's relying on this act of 1950 to legitimize the process and say that, look, this has the Supreme Court has also held this act to be valid in a 2024 judgment, and hence we can rely on this act to carry out this pushback or the deportation exercise. But that act in itself does not apply here, because section 2 of that 1950 act very clearly says that this pertains to people who are ordinary residents of another nation. In this case, these people who are under the threat of deportation or pushback, we don't know whether they're ordinary residents of another nation. How can we decide that? That nation is not coming forward and claiming that they are ordinary residents. So just the fact that you don't even know whether they're actually ordinary residents of another nation or of your own nation, which they might just be, uh, means that that act also does not apply. So there is no legal justification for this to actually happen. And I don't know why the courts haven't intervened yet, and sort of, because I fear that this might betray a sense of institutional apathy, and I hope that's not the case.
Seema, politically, this whole thing about undocumented immigrants, illegal immigration, has been made very big in the last few years. Of course, Assam has a different history of it, but even nationally, we saw it play out during the Delhi elections with the Rohingya refugees and how they were being spoken of and treated. But even then, what's happening now in Assam seems to be the next step from that, where you have Chief Minister openly saying we don't need to follow legal process with this. We can just pick up people and literally toss them across the border. Do you see?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of points. I think she's made all the right points that we need to know, and that was like really illuminating, and particularly remembering that Article 21 does not depend on your citizenship or your being here. But please remember that of the core points on the BJP's agenda that separates this as a party from a spectrum and the majority of other parties, or at least still did before 2014, Bangladeshi migrants has been a big bogey. It's been a big straw man that has been used. And we don't know if against only those who come from Bangladesh. And this is like, it has of course a very unfortunate history in Assam, which a lot of people say is the original sin of how we've dealt badly with the citizenship question, the NRC and all as well. But I think what makes it, which compounds the misery, is that now you've done the NRC, so at what point will you stop? I mean, whose NRC list is it anyway? So is it going to wait for the satisfaction of the particular party in power will I choose the NRC I want? So that's been a very disturbing element once only 19 lakh people were found to be not, and since then the governments have been in violation of the Supreme Court's itself rather disturbing rules. But even those rules were things that the elected government went against. So one thing is that there's a deep political intent to create the Bangladeshi migrant as a category and to have it as a political lobbying point. The second is a very, I mean, you might call it a very poetic and a very disturbing aspect of treating our own people, almost reminiscent of Toba Tek here when you mention no man's land. So there's that dimension of it. And I think history is going to judge this phase quite badly, probably at par when Myanmar decided to, when it was Burma, decided to treat the Rohingya and de-people them or de-citizenize them, if I may use a word like that, or what happened with Sri Lanka much earlier when they behaved the way they did based on ethnicity. And India must be very watchful before it looks like it's going down that road of treating who may be your people like that. So I think that's disturbing. But I think what we must remember from here is diplomatically as well, I was stunned to find the Assam Chief Minister and others relating some kind of a push to get rid of Bangladeshi migrants, supposedly, allegedly, as part of Operation Sindoor. So what's your pitch with Pakistan? We thought that Pakistan was directing this whole thing and Pakistan is responsible for Pahalgam. You've declared that you have a new doctrine in place, which means any terror act, you're going to attack Pakistan. So how are these Bangladeshi migrants who are rickshaw pullers, rag pickers, maybe unemployed, maybe have lived in India, born in India, no other country, how are they material to Operation Sindoor? So I think if somebody puts all that together, that really damns India's own diplomatic position. If you're trying to put Pakistan in the dock, etc., what's all this about? So I think it suggests a way in which they have seized the opportunity. Mr. Himanta Biswa Sarma has been very aggressive, battered on the front foot on this. I think he seized the opportunity. There's an assembly election coming up in a year, and it helps to just square the pitch and communalize issues and make it about going after Bengali speakers in Assam on grounds of indigeneity, of which is a quite a questionable kind of politics that he practices. So I think all these things mix up and put this whole thing in like pretty dubious light.
I just want to add one more thing, drawing from what you said. Just the whole idea of villainizing an entire group of people, othering an entire group of people. First of all, we don't know whether they're actually immigrants or whether they're actually our own citizens. That is one big thing, and it needs to be stressed further on, because at the moment the Assam chief minister is also going around saying things like we do not want to be bothered with the foreigner tribunal. That you already have an institution in place, which in itself is a faulty institution, but now you want to sidestep it further and arbitrarily assign this power to another bunch of people, and none of who are trained. I doubt even a fraction of them have the adequate judicial training that's needed to take these calls of who is your citizen and who is your immigrant. And in any case, just the process of labeling somebody a foreigner or a citizen is so dicey, because there have been cases. For instance, there is this case of this guy called Rahim Ali, who was in 2012 declared a foreigner by the Foreigner Tribunal, and he spent his life in fear of getting arrested or deported or detained, and he appealed the tribunal decision at a high court. The high court upheld the decision, went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court sent the case back to the tribunal, said decide this afresh. The tribunal again labeled him a foreigner. Finally, 12 years later, in I think 1 or 2 years ago, the Supreme Court sat up and looked at the case and said, how is this possible that this happened to this man? He's a citizen of India. By the time that order came, Rahim Ali had been dead for 2 years. So here is a process that is marred by so many loopholes and faults, and it's just riddled by so many issues that can disenfranchise a citizen. And then if you apply that process or a similar process and use that as a justification to push people out of the country, you stand a very grave risk of condemning your own citizens to mortal peril, to risk to their life. So why are we doing this?
And I also find a parallel in what Mr. Sarma is saying about, saying that we're not looking at the foreigner tribunals. For an elected chief minister of a state to say that is akin to Mr. Adityanath's government releasing numbers of those killed in encounters. I mean, that is government data. So almost as if saying that people killed in encounters is okay, which is completely extrajudicial and against the law. So when you have people who are lawmakers, who are the highest authority elected people in those states saying that, that suggests a much more dangerous kind of it portends poorly for, the state of India.
I want to move on to our next topic now. It's been about 4 months since elections took place in Delhi, and a new government held by Chief Minister Rekha Gupta has taken over. There have been several changes that the city has seen, but one of them has been a surge in demolitions under the guise of cleaning up or beautifying the city. Now, demolitions are not new in Delhi. There's been a long history of them, but the pace does seem a bit new. We've seen demolitions of what are being called illegal jhuggi homes in Taimur Nagar, in Andrewsganj, in Jangpura, in Kalkaji, and there are other neighborhoods that have received notices and are now living in fear that their houses are going to be torn down any day. This is a BJP government in the state. The BJP government at the center, the union government, had made the promise of jahan jhuggi wahan makan, meaning if we're tearing down your jhuggi, we're going to build you a house in the same place so that we don't move you away from your place of work, from your community, from all of that. But that doesn't seem to be happening in Delhi. It's not a priority at all. Where in the places where rehabilitation is being promised, it's not being promised at the same site. And all of this is also happening in the middle of at the peak of an extremely hot summer in Delhi. I mean, I think we're in Delhi now, we can attest to just how hot it's been the last few days. Mekhala, I want you to talk about what we've been seeing in over the last few months, but also definitely over the last few weeks. Yeah.
So essentially, this is some. So I do a lot of legal journalism. So I've also been in touch with a lot of lawyers who've been handling these cases, and one of them told me just today that, which is very interesting, and I want to start off with that the law by itself does not really recognize demolitions. The law recognizes rehabilitation. Rehabilitation comes first, demolition comes later as a subtext. Under circumstances, okay, municipal acts will recognize demolitions, but the law focuses on rehabilitation. There's an excellent judgment of the Delhi High Court of Justice Muralidhar, which talked about the right to city for slum dwellers. You don't just have to have shelter over your head. You need to have clean water. You need to have access to a livelihood. You need to have access. Your children need to have access to an education. So all the components that make up good city life are a prerequisite. Then there are Supreme Court judgments that recognize that right to housing is not just a legal right, it's a fundamental right within right to life. So by extension, right to city would also find its space within the realm of right to life, which is fundamental, which is Article 21. Now, sure, there are laws that allow demolitions. There are court orders that allow demolitions, but demolitions have to be carried out keeping rehabilitation in mind. What happens is that if there have been 4,000, hypothetically, if there are 4,000 homes that are demolished, about 2,000 of them will be rehabilitated. And the law mandates, the 2015 policy and protocol mandate for Delhi, that if your house is being demolished or your juggi is being demolished, within a 5 kilometer radius, you have to be rehabilitated. That again is a requirement that is frequently sidestepped. For instance, when the demolitions happened in Madrasi camp, the people who were rehabilitated were sent to Narela, which is easily over 25 kilometers away. Now, that is a big problem because a lot of these people are chauffeurs, house help, domestic workers. They have their livelihood in that area, and their children go to schools in that area. So if you plug them away, they have to start their life from scratch in a completely new space where they might not even have access to the same resources in a far flung corner of the national capital. So a lot of sort of requirements are sidestepped uh, under the garb of beautification of the city or organization of the city or cleaning. But the problem is that when this beautification, organization, cleaning happens, it happens at the behest of the rich and the wealthy, the ones who live the most comfortable life, the ones who are not impacted by the 45 degrees heat, the 50 degrees heat. And so I'm quoting this. It's from an article that Advocate Harshad Anand wrote because he's one of the lawyers in this case. He said something like the rich want these people to come in their houses, do the cleaning, and then disappear. In their imagination, they disappear. And so here is an invisibilizing of an entire population, which also does not stand legal scrutiny if a court was to actually sit and look at what is happening right now. Because one of the big conditions of this law is that you cannot carry out these demolitions in extreme weather conditions, and right now the weather conditions are not any less than extreme. And then the other thing which is most alarmingly happening is the rate at which the urgency with which these demolitions take place as soon as the court starts to is about to hear one of these matters. It happened recently in the case of one of these areas, and on 11 June, the court was about to listen in to the hearing, or they had filed a petition and the court was about to take it up. And before that, before 11 a.m. in the morning, before the courts could open and get on with their job, the whole area was raised. So how are you supposed to do this? And these are the people who have the fewest and the least resources to their disposal.
So I think a political appetite is what the ruling establishment thinks has been created already by speaking of the big beautiful bulldozer. that you have made the bulldozer as part of election campaigns, and it's almost breaking somebody's home is a way of delivering some kind of instant justice. It's some sort of, it's been tied in with how we're taking revenge on behalf of the state, on behalf of all of you, for something that you may have done. So completely unconnected to your right to build a house, but you do that. So I think because a whole lot of optics, the visuals, all this has been happening for a few years, that they're able to again in the capital city do this to, as you said, to the most vulnerable, to people who are central to the functioning of like Delhi. And why I think it's a real travesty is that this is when we talk about smart cities, we talk about how urbanization is the future. All these people who've come here, a lot of them would be first generation migrants. Of course, some have been living forever and ever in Delhi, but they come here with hopes for a better life, for to be able to secure 3 meals a day. They come and work very hard, and they make these otherwise ridiculous, our lives, the lives of the middle class and the elite possible in all sorts of ways. Cheap labor is something on which they live on. So I think that there's and I think the BJP has gone for a high risk option where it probably thinks that these people who live here are not our voters. They are not people who are seen traditionally to be voting for the BJP. They're known to be voters of the Congress earlier and now AAP. So there seems to be a low cost politically of doing this, and they think that if they do it early in their tenure, they can do it. So one is, of course, that people go missing from electoral rolls, but if people themselves go missing, that may be a foolproof way of ensuring that a certain class that you don't think is politically with you, you deal with. Otherwise, I see no absolute reason why homes should be demolished like this at a time when the Prime Minister talks about Awas Yojana. There are these ads that have gone up in the metros saying that by the time you cross from this to this station, we built 5 homes. So for whom are these homes being built? And what is actually illegal home or illegal land? I mean, these are things that governments can have their views on. There can be a legality and a law about it. But how you deal with it, how you render somebody homeless and out of home and hearth, it's really a big decision which is just being taken, and being taken with a view to actually increase their political popularity, etc. So I think it's deeply disturbing. And there is now a triple engine government here. So it's actually more worrying about who's going to pick up, cudgels on behalf of those who are being kind of driven away. So I hope that there is institutional kind of alertness to this, and they wake up to this. But I don't see much of that really happening. It's really interesting, when the Humayun's tomb many years ago, Aga Khan Foundation either approached them or the government approached them in order to do the refurbishing of the tomb. There was a lot of concern of people living around them because it was all very highly populated areas. But Aga Khan Foundation then said that we believe in rehabilitating and redoing everything, which means that the people who are also part of that heritage. So the people are living heritage and they are part of, and that actually got me thinking also very differently, because I found that a very refreshing way of looking at things. And I think it's high time that any government, whether it is this government or, governments earlier have also done demolitions, and Delhi has borne witness to Turkman Gate and various other demolitions that have been happening. But they must realize that minus the people, a city is nothing. You don't have like world-class buildings and some grand glass and brick structures will add up to nothing if the people there are not taken care of. So it's quite a moment to see this happening in Delhi today.
Do you think there's also a sort of public normalization of
Fully.
of home demolition? Because reading
Someone
कि
else's
किसी
home,
का
someone
घर
else's
गिरा
home.
दिया,
Yeah.
someone's house is torn down, it should be shocking, right? But it doesn't feel like it is for
Yeah, no, it
for a
doesn't.
city
And
like
like you
Delhi.
said, like the imagery of a bulldozer has become very commonplace, and
It's like clean it up, like
yeah.
it's it's and also to link it with development, which involves actually first demolition. We'll first level someone else's house, and then we can develop it, and then a nice mall or a nice street extended can come up once we take that ready guy out of here. But so I think that, and that is where I think the public mind has been marinated with this bulldozer business, entering the discourse as part of a political push, and we do that. We clean the system, and then we.
And incidentally, I do want to draw a parallel between the thing we were talking about earlier, the Assam deportations, and this happening. So we have spoken a bit about Assam deportations, but what happens in the case of demolitions is that there is a step-by-step process. So a part of the 4-step process that legally goes into a demolition and rehabilitation exercise involves that a committee sits and discusses the rehabilitation eligibility. So it's called a rehabilitation, it's called an eligibility determination committee that sits together and decides whether you are eligible for rehabilitation or not. Now, the problem with that is a lot of times people are dropped from the list of eligible people to be rehabilitated for the simple reason that there's a clerical error in their name, there's a spelling mistake. You cannot trace their records. For instance, or even during the demolition exercise, these kind of things, like for instance, last year or in January 2024, when the Nizamuddin Basti was being demolished, one of the reasons why people lost their home was because they were not able to find the electricity documents. It's a different matter that they did not get electricity for the longest time. So how are they going to find it from the right date? So these kind of reasons, spelling mistake, lack of adequate documents, just which are also a consequence of poverty and a lack of resources, enable the leaving out, exclusion of a lot of people from the rehabilitation that they require. Similarly, in the case of Assam, in the case of citizenship, a lot of people are denied citizenship or are held to be foreigners for a lack of adequate documentation, or owing to a spelling mistake, or because somebody got married and they changed their surname and there is no record, which again is a consequence of lack of resources, lack of privilege. And I feel that the courts, knowing these things in both these situations, need to be more alive to the caste and class dynamics that influence people's marginalization, otherization, alienation, stripping them of their bare minimum resources. And I feel that maybe because the because caste and class is not adequately represented among figures of the authority, it just kind of percolates into the outcome that is suffered by people who could have very easily been continue to have their homes and continue to have their citizenship.
You know, in the previous years, I haven't seen it this year, but in previous years in Assam during the floods, there were these really poignant scenes of families, elderly people, middle-aged people struggling at a time of like deep floods and crisis, struggling with plastic bags which had whatever documentation. And they didn't even want to leave their homes because there was this fear that in this pouring rain which could drown us out, just keep these papers secure because our lives could depend on it. And they could, for the reasons that you said, that it's so difficult to be able to get a duplicate Aadhaar or to get a copy of your Aadhaar. I don't mean duplicate Aadhaar, but to get another copy of that same Aadhaar, etc. You know, it's just so tragic.
I want to move now to a slightly more global topic. Early today, that's Friday morning, Israel launched an attack at various locations in Iran, including the capital Tehran, targeting Iran's nuclear facilities, ballistic missile factories, and military commanders. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which oversees all nuclear program in Iran, has confirmed that the uranium enrichment facility at Natanz was hit by an Israeli strike. Now, Israel's rather controversial Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is facing an ICC warrant for the military action against Palestinians, which have been called war crimes, has said that this was all to roll back an existential threat that Israel is facing from Iran, and that this operation will continue for as long as it takes to remove this threat. The US has said that Israel is acting unilaterally in this matter, though Donald Trump has also said that he knew this was going to happen. But I think they're trying to say that because it's unilateral, Iran's retaliation should not target any US troops or facilities. Iran has, of course, said that it will be retaliating. The Iranian army spokesperson have said that at least one military commander and 2 nuclear scientists and researchers have been killed in these attacks. Now, Israel's action also comes at a time when Iran and the US have been in talks about the nuclear program in Iran. These talks have not concluded, they are ongoing. The arguments that Netanyahu has cited to try and justify this attack have come under severe question because Iran's entire nuclear program, unlike that of any other country, is under constant scrutiny from the IAEA, and they have not found any evidence of these existential threats that he's citing. And this escalation from Israel also comes at a time when more and more questions are being asked about Israel's actions in Gaza, including some reports say from within Israel itself. And just yesterday there was another resolution at the United Nations General Assembly calling for a ceasefire, for a release of hostages, and for Israel to allow humanitarian aid to enter Gaza, which passed with more than a three-fourths majority. India decided to abstain, though it said that while it knows that it is concerned about the humanitarian condition, uh, peace will only come from dialogue and diplomacy and not from accusations. So, Seema, what are your thoughts on what we're seeing in the Middle East today?
It's ironic and interesting that Netanyahu has used the phrase existential threat because, if anything, Israel's.
I mean, I should say he said it's a threat to Israel's very survival. It was
Is well, fine. It's a threat to very survival. I think a lot of his government and Israel's actions are pretty much an existential threat. These are my words to the semblance of the world order that state and to the region. And I think the world is looking up in complete and utter horror. And I'm looking up in horror at the fact that there's nothing else except looking up in horror to Israel's actions, whether it is to Palestine, to the Palestinians living inside Israel, or to the ones in Gaza. Inexcusable actions which led to some developments which gave Israel a really long rope for a long time, and Hamas's actions against Israel, the terrorist activity on the 7th of October, etc., no doubt horrible, deeply condemned by everybody with any kind of a conscience. But the retaliation is not just that, it's been actually utterly horrendous watching those images from such a small piece of land which is so visible. It's not a battle going on in a remote jungle somewhere. It's televised into drawing rooms and onto our phones, and the inability of big powers, superpowers to do anything about it actually gives Israel impunity, and Israel's actions are the ones that are a threat to the world. And I think this latest action, and it is not perhaps a coincidence that it happens within hours of this statement by the UN coming out and the UK having sanctioned two far-right ministers, two colleagues of Netanyahu, and also trouble that Netanyahu is having in keeping his whole government afloat. But I've never seen the world, the people of Palestine, and now also Iran and the entire region paying to keep Mr. Netanyahu in power. So I think this entire dangerous, high-risk path is proving very costly. And it's very disturbing to also see, naturally, Iran saying that it will now retaliate. And I read a statement on Tehran Times that Iran has said that it is like twisting a tiger's tail. So we don't know how all this will eventually play out. But certainly it's a very busy and disturbing chessboard. And it is something that has implications on the world for its moral conscience, for at what point does it step in and draw the line next time? What's the role of the United Nations? Forget about the price of oil, which is also a deep concern. The airspace in Iran is blocked. That has its own consequences. And this great dream that Mr. Trump tried to sketch when he went to West Asia as part of his first trip to Qatar and all, and he very strategically left out both Israel and Palestine and went back. He said he didn't want a war. But I think a lot of Trump's statements and also the latest statement after that, telling Iran to kind of just fall in line, otherwise the whole thing will be blown apart or something like that. This is extremely casual, and to deal with Iran like that at a time when you're in talks, I think this just again underscores as to what turbulence and what almost like near disaster moments the world is having, that it's kind of put horror shows, speculative fiction and everything out of business. So I think it's like a very disturbing time, and there's a war in Ukraine that we've been unable to stop. India and Pakistan have just finished a very high-risk kind of a maneuver with each other. It's still unresolved. It has left the region still tentative and worried. There's this trying to finish off the genocidal actions of Israel in Gaza. So all in all, I have no answers, but just a lot of tragic observations about what's happening. But it clearly doesn't portend well for either the peace in this region, peace of people, or what the state of the world would be should similar action be taken by other countries. Have we reached the point that anybody can get up one day and decide to do preemptive strikes?
Would either of you like to comment on India's abstention at the UNGA?
Yeah, I mean, I can just say that it's quite it's not shocking, but in the sense it's quite unsettling that as a country we talk about Vasudev Kutumbakam, we could talk about world is one family. Our prime minister goes and says, I mean, maybe last year that we're not in the era of war, we are in the era of diplomatic dialogue. So what happens when it comes to India to take an action against, in favor of ceasefire in favor of peace. We did in December 2023, we did vote for ceasefire. What changed? I'm struggling to understand, because for a country that is, for a government that tries to portray itself as being pro peace, we need to do a little bit more than just say these things.
Yeah, and also more than pro peace, I think when India claims to be wanting to lead the global majority, global south, etc., we're not even like in charge of the region. In South Asia, all countries have voted against how India has voted. And India stands with just two other Asian countries, Georgia and Timor-Leste. That's it. So that's your degree of alienation in your own region. So I don't know what role, again, to the various diplomatic self-goals, this just adds to that. And if you just look at the image of how India's diplomacy has gone down and tanked from the Vishwaguru stage to being bracketed with China some 10 or 15 years ago, to now firmly wanting to be bracketed with Pakistan, sending out these delegations, abstaining on something that is asking for a ceasefire on Gaza. All this tells a very poor story of India's diplomatic maneuvers, and seems quite delusional to think that you'd want the world to be on your side and on the side of peace and project yourself like that, with this being the track record of your votes and where you stand.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you both so much for joining us. We will be following these developing stories on our website and our YouTube channel. Thank you all for watching.